The medic looked at Captain Laura Mitchell's mangled arm, trapped under the burning helicopter wreckage. "We need an hour to cut through this metal," he said. Laura looked at the 100 soldiers surrounded by advancing enemy forces. "We don't have an hour." She reached for the bone saw. What happened in the next 4 minutes would become the most brutal act of heroism in military history. Forward Operating Base. Thunder sat in eastern Syria, 30 miles from any support, surrounded by desert and death. On March 15, 2018, it housed 100 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division and one medical officer who would redefine the meaning of sacrifice. Captain Laura Mitchell was 32 years old, a combat surgeon who had saved more lives than she could count. She was about to save 100 more, but the cost would be part of herself. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. Laura Mitchell never intended to be a soldier. She graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School in 2010, specializing in trauma surgery. Her professors described her as technically brilliant, but emotionally connected to every patient. She could perform impossible surgeries with rock-steady hands, while tears streamed down her face for the lives she was trying to save. When she joined the Army in 2012, it wasn't for glory or adventure. She simply wanted to be where her skills were needed most. By 2018, Laura had completed 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her medical record showed 1,847 successful surgeries under combat conditions. She had operated in tents during sandstorms, in helicopters under fire, and once performed brain surgery using kitchen utensils when her equipment was destroyed. Other surgeons called her the miracle worker. Soldiers called her their guardian angel. She was the person everyone wanted nearby when everything went wrong. March 15th started as a routine day at FOB Thunder. Laura was conducting medical inventory when the first alarm sounded. A massive enemy force, later identified as over 500 fighters, had surrounded the base. They had anti-aircraft weapons that made helicopter evacuation impossible and enough firepower to overrun the base within hours. The 100 soldiers at FOB Thunder were outnumbered 5-1 with no possibility of reinforcement. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Rogers, immediately ordered defensive positions. The plan was simple but desperate: hold out until air support could eliminate the anti-aircraft threats. Then evacuate. But they needed to reach the extraction point, a cleared area 200 meters from the main base. The only route was blocked by a crashed CH-47 Chinook helicopter that had gone down during a supply run the previous week. Moving the Chinook required heavy equipment they didn't have. Going around it meant crossing 400 meters of open ground under enemy fire. The soldiers were trapped between bad options and worse ones. That's when Laura Mitchell made a decision that would seem impossible to anyone who hadn't seen what she had seen, hadn't held dying soldiers in her arms, hadn't made the calculations that combat surgeons make every day about who can be saved and what it costs. Laura volunteered to help clear the helicopter. She was examining the wreckage, looking for weak points they could exploit, when the enemy attacked. The first rocket-propelled grenade hit the Chinook's fuel tank. The explosion threw Laura sideways, and when the smoke cleared, her left arm was pinned beneath a section of the helicopter's transmission that had been blown free. The white-hot metal had crushed her arm just below the elbow, trapping her completely. Specialist Michael Torres, the medic who reached Laura first, assessed the situation with professional detachment that barely masked his horror. The transmission assembly weighed over 300 pounds. Her arm was crushed beyond salvage, bones visible through torn flesh. Moving the metal would require cutting tools they didn't have or heavy equipment that was 50 miles away. Torres estimated it would take at least an hour to free her, probably more. The enemy assault had begun in earnest. Machine gun fire raked the base perimeter. Mortars fell like rain. The 100 soldiers of FOB Thunder were fighting for their lives. But they were losing ground. Every minute mattered. Every soldier was needed at the defensive positions, and the escape route was still blocked by the Chinook, with Laura trapped beside it. Laura Mitchell made her assessment with the same clinical detachment she brought to surgery. She had performed dozens of amputations in combat zones. She knew the anatomy perfectly, where to cut, which vessels to tie off, how to prevent shock. She had just never considered performing one on herself. But the math was simple. One arm versus 100 lives. 4 minutes of agony versus countless families destroyed. She told Torres to bring her medical kit. When he realized what she intended, he tried to argue, but Laura gave him direct orders. She needed morphine, enough to dull the pain but not enough to impair her judgment. She needed a tourniquet, the surgical bone saw from her kit, and someone to hold her steady. Torres would later testify that Laura's voice never wavered, that she gave instructions like she was teaching a medical class, not preparing to mutilate herself. The tourniquet went on first, twisted until the blood flow stopped completely. Laura knew she had minutes before tissue death became irreversible. She injected the morphine directly into the nerve clusters, a technique she had perfected in Afghanistan. It wouldn't stop all the pain, but it would keep her conscious. She positioned the bone saw, took 3 deep breaths, and began. The sound of bone saw on living bone is something no one at FOB Thunder would ever forget. Laura worked with mechanical precision, her right hand steady, despite the agony that the morphine couldn't quite mask. She cut through skin and muscle with swift efficiency, pausing only to tie off major vessels with suture thread. When she reached the bone, she didn't hesitate. 4 minutes and 17 seconds after she began, Captain Laura Mitchell pulled her body free from the wreckage, leaving her left arm behind. Torres immediately went to work on the stump, but Laura pushed him away. She could handle her own wound. The soldiers needed leadership. The enemy was advancing. She fashioned a field dressing from her uniform, tightened the tourniquet, and injected herself with adrenaline to combat the shock. Then she stood up, picked up her M4 rifle with her remaining hand, and walked toward the defensive perimeter. What happened over the next 14 hours defied medical explanation. Laura Mitchell, despite massive blood loss and traumatic amputation, took command of the eastern defensive position. She organized overlapping fields of fire, coordinated ammunition distribution, and called in artillery strikes with GPS coordinates she calculated in her head. When enemy fighters broke through the perimeter, she engaged them directly, firing her rifle one-handed with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible. The first wave of attackers came at sunset. 200 fighters charged across open ground, expecting to overwhelm the shocked Americans. Laura had positioned the machine guns to create interlocking kill zones. She directed fire like a conductor leading an orchestra, shifting soldiers to meet threats, calling out targets, maintaining calm while her severed arm sent waves of agony through her body. The attack broke apart 50 meters from the perimeter. Between attacks, Laura continued her duties as medical officer. She treated wounded soldiers one-handed, teaching others to be her left hand when procedures required two. She performed emergency surgery on Staff Sergeant Davis, removing shrapnel from his chest cavity while enemy mortars fell around them. She talked Private Johnson through his panic attack, all while her own body was shutting down from trauma and blood loss. The second assault came at midnight. This time the enemy had learned. They used smoke grenades to obscure vision and attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. Laura's position was nearly overrun when enemy fighters reached the perimeter wire. She transitioned from rifle to pistol, engaging targets at point-blank range. Witnesses described her as moving with supernatural calm, as if the missing arm was just another tactical consideration to factor into her calculations. By 0300 hours, Laura had personally eliminated 12 enemy combatants. But more importantly, her leadership had kept the defensive line intact. She had redistributed ammunition from damaged positions, organized the wounded into a secondary defensive line, and maintained radio contact with supporting artillery units. All of this while managing traumatic shock that should have killed her hours earlier. The third wave came at dawn, the enemy's final desperate attempt to overrun the base before American reinforcements arrived. They had saved their best fighters for last, including foreign mercenaries with combat experience in Chechnya and Afghanistan. Laura identified the assault leaders through her scope and eliminated them with precision shots that she shouldn't have been able to make with one arm. When her rifle jammed, she cleared it using her teeth and her knee, never stopping her stream of tactical commands to the soldiers around her. One moment from that final battle became legendary among the survivors. An enemy fighter had broken through and was charging Laura's position. She was out of ammunition, her pistol empty. Witnesses watched her pick up an entrenching tool with her remaining hand and throw it like a tomahawk, striking the attacker in the head from 15 feet away. She then retrieved his weapon and continued fighting. By the time the sun fully rose, the attack was broken. Air support had finally eliminated the anti-aircraft threats. Evacuation helicopters were inbound. Of the 100 soldiers at FOB Thunder, 94 were still alive, many wounded but breathing. The defensive positions were littered with enemy dead. Final count put it at 127, eliminated, with 20 confirmed as Laura's direct kills. As the medevac helicopter approached, Laura Mitchell finally allowed herself to collapse. She had lost approximately 40% of her blood volume. Her body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. Toxins from the traumatic amputation were causing organ failure. The flight medics who treated her said she was minutes from death. They couldn't understand how she had remained conscious, much less functional, for 14 hours after such massive trauma. The medical report from Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, where Laura was evacuated, reads like fiction. Traumatic amputation of the left arm below the elbow, self-inflicted, severe blood loss requiring 12 units of transfusion, kidney failure from shock toxins, infection from battlefield contamination, burns from the helicopter explosion, muscle damage from prolonged tourniquet application. The doctors said she should have died at least 6 times during the night, but Laura Mitchell survived. More than that, she recovered. Within 6 months, she was fitted with an advanced prosthetic arm. Within a year, she had returned to surgery, adapting her techniques to work with the prosthetic. She became the first amputee surgeon to perform combat medicine, returning to Iraq for one final tour where she saved another 20. The investigation into the battle at FOB Thunder included testimony from every survivor. Their accounts were remarkably consistent. Captain Laura Mitchell had saved them all through a combination of medical skill, tactical brilliance, and superhuman willpower. Several soldiers independently used the word possessed to describe her state during the battle, as if something beyond human had taken control. Private First Class Jennifer Smith, who fought beside Laura during the final assault, provided perhaps the most eloquent testimony. She was missing an arm and covered in blood, but she was the strongest person on that battlefield. Every time I wanted to give up, I would look at her standing there, rifle in one hand, calling out targets, and I would think, if she can keep fighting, so can I. The psychological evaluation of Laura Mitchell after the incident revealed no signs of PTSD or survivor's guilt. When asked how she had made the decision to amputate her own arm, she responded with characteristic directness. The math was simple. One arm equals maybe 60 years of limited capability for me. 100 soldiers equals thousands of years of life, thousands of moments with families, millions of potential experiences. Any surgeon would make that trade. Laura Mitchell received the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the White House on November 11, 2018. The citation described her actions as conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. President Trump, while presenting the medal, departed from his prepared remarks to say, "I've given out several of these medals, but this one is different. This is superhuman." The enemy force that attacked FOB Thunder was later identified as a coalition of ISIS remnants and foreign mercenaries. Captured communications revealed that they had specifically targeted the base because they believed it was weakly defended. After the battle, intercepted messages showed they referred to Laura Mitchell as the Demon Doctor and claimed she couldn't be killed by normal means. Laura's prosthetic arm became famous in its own right. She had it specially designed with surgical attachments, allowing her to operate as effectively as before. She painted it with the names of the 100 soldiers from FOB Thunder, carrying them with her into every surgery. Young amputees would travel across the country to meet her, to see proof that losing a limb didn't mean losing capability. The bone saw Laura used for the amputation is now displayed at the Army Medical Department Museum at Fort Sam Houston. Visitors often stand in silence before it, trying to imagine the willpower required to use such a tool on oneself. The museum guide always tells them the same thing. Don't try to understand the action. Understand the love behind it. Laura Mitchell loved those soldiers enough to tear herself apart to save them. In 2020, Laura established the Mitchell Foundation for Combat Medicine, training surgeons in extreme battlefield techniques. She teaches a course called Necessary Sacrifices, where she discusses triage decisions and the mathematics of survival. She always begins the course with the same statement: medicine is about saving lives. Sometimes that means sacrificing parts to save the whole. On March 15, 2018, I was the part. The 100 soldiers were the whole. I'd make the same decision today. The soldiers from FOB Thunder stay in contact through a group chat called Laura's 100. Every March 15th, they gather virtually or in person to commemorate the day Captain Mitchell chose them over herself. Many have named daughters Laura. Several became medics, inspired by her example. All of them carry a weight of gratitude that borders on the religious. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, who was 19 during the battle, spoke at the 5th anniversary commemoration. People ask me if I believe in God. I tell them I don't need to believe. I've seen an angel. She was covered in blood, missing an arm and holding a rifle. She stood between death and 100 soldiers, and death blinked first. Laura Mitchell continues to serve as a military surgeon, now holding the rank of colonel. She has performed over 3,000 surgeries since losing her arm, her prosthetic moving with the same precision as flesh and bone. She claims no special heroism, insisting she just did what any soldier would do. But those who were there know differently. They know that on March 15, 2018, Captain Laura Mitchell transcended human limitations through an act of will that redefined courage. The final entry in the official after-action report, written by Lieutenant Colonel Rogers, perhaps says it best. Captain Mitchell's actions represent the highest ideals of military service, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others. She literally gave part of herself so that others might live. In 14 hours of combat, missing an arm she had amputated herself, she demonstrated that the human spirit, when driven by love and duty, can achieve the impossible. She didn't just save 100 soldiers, she showed us what we could become.